Australia has accused a Chinese jet it says dropped flares within 30 metres of its aircraft over the South China Sea of unsafe and unprofessional conduct. Canberra was also monitoring 3 Chinese warships, one of which passed into Australia's exclusive economic zone. Meanwhile, New Zealand is concerned about an upgrade in ties between China and the Cook Islands, which it has constitutional ties with. What's behind the Chinese task force's close presence to Australia, and could the Cook Islands become the next Solomon Islands? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yi Kavat. Joining us today are Chenlung Kuo, United Daily News Deputy Editor-in-Chief, and Wen-ti Sung, Atlantic Council Global China Hub Non-Resident Fellow. Very warm welcome to both of you on the show today. This is the moment a Chinese J-16 fighter on the right releases a flare close to an Australian Poseidon plane on the left over the South China Sea. The voice appears to order the Chinese jet to block the Australian plane. Australia says the flare was released within 30 metres of its plane, which was conducting routine surveillance. And these are images of the Chinese task force stationed off Australia, a frigate that sailed through the Torres Strait into Australia's exclusive economic zone, accompanying a destroyer and a tanker. Wen-ti, let me come to you first. So Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles says that there was nothing illegal about this. Military ships can pass through other countries' EEZs. What do we know about what these Chinese ships were doing in waters off Australia?
I think it's a way for China to show muscle, first and foremost. And I think just like what we learned about in the $1 Million, going back to ancient Greece, there's a line that goes, the strong will do what they can, the weak will suffer what they must. So I think this is a situation where China trying to show the world that it has military assets and it's not afraid to use it. And indeed, if you see more and more Chinese military present in farther and nearer corners, more distance field operation going forward, I think over time, if China can do it without suffering much consequence or pushback, it will go some way towards further legitimizing China as a global tier military power and one that has a de facto license to operate in areas far away from its shore. And for many other countries in the region, of course, this may not be the most reassuring thing to witness.
Right. And Chenlung, do you believe that there was any link between the 2 incidents, the dropping the flares in front, close to Australian aircraft over the South China Sea, and then the aggressive action, as Wen-ti has framed it, from China actually in Australia's EEZ?
From China point of view, they will play it innocent because for a frigate to sail all the way to the outside of Australia, that would take times and that would take planning. While the flare warning on Australian patrol plane is something that happens, is not pre-planned. So 2 things happen at the same time, probably is out of coincidence. But if you see it from Australian point of view, you are seeing that China has become more and more aggressive all the time. Now they are sending a fleet of ships to as close to the Australian shoreline, never seen before. So I think that would bring a warning to Australian general public.
You said it would take some time for the frigate or for the task force to sail from China down to Australia. But what happens if they were actually in the area already, for example, carrying out military exercises?
Right. I think that's also a possibility. Especially this time, we are seeing those ships is not normal ships. Those are big ships. One is over 10,000 tons. The other is like 4,000 tons. So those kind of missile destroyers is really posing some threat to the Australian. And as far as I recollect, there's no such frigate had been approaching Australia before like that. That means that China had been extending its reach beyond the first island chain and posing a real threat to Australia.
And Wen-ti, China has accused Australia, in terms of the aircraft over the South China Sea, of provocation and undermining its sovereignty. Now, Canberra's position is that there was no way that Chinese jet could have controlled, the flare that was released, and that could not have controlled that it wouldn't have actually come into contact with the plane. So would that justify the fact that China thinks that its sovereignty was undermined? Would that justify the kind of international incident that may have occurred if there had been the contact, if anybody from that plane had been injured or even worse?
I can see the narrative would make sense from Chinese perspective, but the story may look very different from the perspective of other regional states, for example, for whom there is still ongoing disagreement, indeed disputes about the exact sovereignty and therefore the associated airspace, territorial water, and what have you of South China Sea, including islands which China may have a presence in. So in that sense, even if it is Chinese airspace, which is something that's in dispute, of course, among the region states, even if it is Chinese airspace, still firing at that kind of flare when the two airplanes from Chinese side, Australian side, are merely dozens of meters apart, is surely going to be very provocative from the Chinese side. Indeed, will pose a certain military risk should there actually be contact either between the plane or if the Chinese fleet actually landed on the Australian warship, for example. So that's a kind of unnecessary escalation that nobody like to see and is in nobody's interest.
Right. And so, Song, do you think there's a calculation there on the Chinese side?
I think there's other ways that you can demonstrate or communicate with the other side that you have actually posing a threat or entering the area that we have concern. You don't have to need to fire a flare because firing a flare, even though it's a warning shot, once it touches upon a plane, that will cause some damage. I think what Australian Defence Minister have been saying that this is unsafe and unprofessional movement coming from the Chinese military. I think that is quite correct because I think we are seeing a different degree now. I mean, for about 6 or 7 years ago, we are seeing the American ships and other international ships, they are sailing through the South China Sea. And at the time, they are claiming it's freedom of navigation. And China at the time, they are not trying to do anything, only communicating through radio or having that kind of warning. But now they are using their J-16s to have a warning shot. And the third stage, maybe they're actually going to do something that is going to causing an incident. So I think gradually China's military strength in the South China Sea have been building up, and that will causing and really posing some danger for the regional countries.
So you see more and more assertive behavior
Right.
from China. Now, in August 2024, 2 Chinese aircraft dropped flares dangerously close to a Philippine plane over Scarborough Shoal. Manila has condemned China's latest maneuver against Australia. In November 2024, the Philippines and Australia held the first bilateral defence ministers meeting in Canberra. Here's the Philippine Defence Secretary.
We want to lay the foundation of principled cooperation between the two of our countries. Given the fact that we live in the same part of the world, we have an interest in ensuring peace and stability here, and the only framework we can operate on is on the basis of the UN Charter and international law, and to resist any unilateral attempts of redefining it.
Wen-ti, is there a sense that Australia is becoming a Chinese target because of its, closeness or increasing closeness to the Philippines? Also, of course, their allied activity involving the US, for example, Coat North 25 and Squad, which is Australia, the Philippines, Japan, also held some exercises in early February in Manila's EEZ.
Yeah, I mean, I think closer Australia-Philippine ties definitely going to be part of the picture for sure. I think if we zoom out a little bit, the broader backdrop here is that the kind of icy relation between Australia and China that I've been witnessing over the last, let's say 6-7 years or so, 2018, 2019, give or take, until about 2023, 24, that ice age of Australia-China relations has been largely over. So in that sense, China is not so much in a hurry to be particularly going out of the way to be nice to Australia just for restoration of that tie. So in that sense, having gotten that part of the story taken care of, China now feels it has a more freer license to do what it usually does to Australia that it does to other countries.
No, that's an interesting interpretation. So you're saying because there's now the thaw, that they can actually, if we want to frame it, misbehave more or push the boundaries more?
I suppose, let's say, this is probably a more positive way to frame it. When relation was bad between the two sides, then China will be worried about how there will be vast interest in a constituency that's going to be more hawkish towards China and to be more China skeptical. Now, China having been nice to Australia, well, nicer than usual to Australia over the few years, China may feel like finally it's overcompensated enough to Australia now in terms of going out of their way to be nicer than usual. Now they can play it the way they usually play it towards other country. So that's in normal double standards. If you go back to, let's say, 2021, 22, when China was really trying to, 2022, 2023, when China was really trying to get Australia back, you would see China being extra nice to Australia. Even when there were new joint declarations from the Quad countries, for example, about more role for the Quad in Taiwan Strait, in Indo-Pacific, China would be unhappy, but China, in their statements condemning it, China will be saying, U.S. bad, Cold War mindset, bring tension back to the region, but it would not single out Australia ever. It would say, poor Australia, you've been misled by Uncle Sam. So that's the overcompensating phase of China's approach to Australia. Now it's largely over, and so when China sees fit to show some muscle, to play some tough guy, for some nationally important scoring, China is not shy about doing it, even to Australia.
Right, and as Chenlung was saying, maybe the cost is on the Albanese government, given that there's upcoming elections. How would you characterize Philippine and Australia relations now? We heard what the Defense Secretary said.
Philippines, of course, is the one that is needing the help of the most coming from other countries. United States have been playing a major supporters, and also Japan and Australia. Now we are also seeing France and other countries are joining hands in supporting Philippines to build up its own defense forces, and also there's more and more joint military exercise going on. But I would like to add something that Wen-ti had just said, because they used to have an annual, it's called Defense and Strategic Dialogue between Australia and China. The purpose of having that annual dialogue is try to talk it over all the military differences, what kind of strategy you are having to make it more transparent between the two countries.
I believe it's just occurred again.
Right. This is exactly what I tried to say, that ever since 2019, that had been postponed and not having it at the annual dialogue until I think on 17th, they restarted again. And of course, during the session, they talked over the flare incidents that had just happened. But in the final news statement, they refrained from talking about the particular incidents. Australia only saying that they are hoping that China would follow the United Nations on Sea of Law, those kind of things. But I think that kind of dialogue exactly is for the purpose that they don't want to have the military tension to escalate to a degree that would damage the bilateral relations.
Right, okay. Wen-ti, you wanted to...
Yeah, I just want to add a point about Philippines and indeed the Taiwan factor in closer Philippines-Australian collaboration on security and defense. I think there's increasing awareness now in the Philippines defense community as well that in any kind of Taiwan contingency, Philippines will inevitably be part of the picture as well. And that is why we're seeing, for example, in the last year or two, the signing of RAA, that is Base Access Reciprocal Access Agreement, RAA, between both Philippines, Japan, and then Philippines, Australia. Because Taiwan contingency, Japan will be part of it, Philippines to Taiwan South will be part of it, and indeed, why Australia? Because Australia's largest move in security front over the last few years has been the signing of AUKUS Defense Cooperation Agreement, Australia, US, and UK. As a part of a rationale undergirding it back in 2021, you hear from Australian government talking to the Australian community as well as saying basically, why work towards a nuclear submarine? Because in a Taiwan contingency scenario, nuclear submarine sphere operation and durability can go much, much farther up north than just Coral Sea. So in that sense, that's also one reason why you see Philippines and Australia working together. And you can argue, getting back to the topic earlier, Yes, Philippines, Australia Defense Cooperation with a latent Taiwan factor may be one consideration why China has been a bit tougher to Australia and the Philippines recently.
Yeah, and if you could actually also just touch on, we know that Australia doesn't have a territorial claim in the South China Sea. It doesn't have any kind of territorial dispute with China. So what is Australia's stake or interest in a possible South China Sea conflict or Taiwan Strait conflict? It's to do with trade, isn't it?
Trade is certainly a major part of it, for sure. I mean, given that so much of the world's trade goes through the Taiwan Strait and waters in the surrounding areas. So in that sense, Australia definitely has a stake in it, for sure. And I think for Australia doesn't have a direct stake in the territorial outcomes of the disputes in South China Sea or Taiwan or East China Sea, what have you. So what Australia wants to do is to be seen as an honest broker, an extra regional power that doesn't have a direct stake in the game, want to play nice, and isn't quite as big as Uncle Sam, which the sheer size of which gives U.S. a certain towering presence that may not be welcome to every state in the region. So that's Australia's interest, being seen as an honest broker, one that doesn't want to root for any particular outcome, just want things to work out and be stable.
Yeah, and perhaps the rules-based international.
For sure.
Following the Chinese flare incident, the head of US Indo-PACOM, Samuel Paparo, is travelling to Canberra to meet with Australian defence officials. As of recording time, that meeting has not yet occurred. But earlier, Richard Marles had travelled to Washington, D.C. for the first bilateral meeting of the new US Secretary of Defence, Pete Hegseth. Shortly after that meeting, Hegseth made a speech to NATO on February 12th, in which he explained the US's need to shift away from European security. Take a look.
The United States faces consequential threats to our homeland. We must and we are focusing on security of our own borders. We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese with the capability and intent to threaten our homeland and core national interests in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail.
Chenlung, so how significant was Hegseth's speech there for this region and also the choice of Australia as his first bilateral counterpart meeting?
I think the speech by the new defense minister in Munich, I assume, is exactly is the point that now the U.S. want to concentrate all its military resources and get away from the old entanglement that they have in Europe. They are in the Hegseth speech, he's mentioning that the European will have to increase its defense budget to 5% and have to take care of what's happening in Europe. That means the crisis in Ukraine. And what Hegseth is saying that the U.S. want to move and concentrate all its military resources in Indo-Pacific. I think that's the point why he's making, and that is the reason why he want to meet with the defense minister of Australia, and also I think they want to increase its military cooperation with Japan. I think now it's something that the Trump administration we're going to see the new policy shift.
And Wen-ti, so did you read, these signals, are they very, very clear now? Because there had been a lot of consternation and worries about whether Trump 2.0 would carry on Biden's alliances and focus on the Indo-Pacific. Is the signal very clear? Is there now nothing to worry about?
Signal is clear from the Pentagon. The signal is less unambiguous clear from the Trump administration as a whole. So I guess the two-tier answer to this. Clearly, from what we see from the new defense secretary from the U.S. side, what we're seeing is that the defense ministry in the U.S. try to show that it is committed to the Indo-Pacific region in general, and that it is committed to the continued viability of AUKUS in specific. And that is why when the new defense secretary chooses Australia to be the site of his first bilateral meeting since swearing in, is trying to say that U.S. will still treat friends differently from how it treats foes and other bystanders. That Australia, having had what they call 100 years of friendship with America, having gone to every single international conflict with America over the last 70, 80 years, that means something still to the American servicemen and women. I think that's the overall message they're trying to drive through. And of course, AUKUS being the crown jewel of a US, Australia, UK defense cooperation today needs that kind of political symbolism to continue sustain the momentum going forward.
And so, what do you read into Paparo's visit to Canberra? Does it help to reinforce that commitment?
I think for the U.S. defense ministers with its Australian counterpart, that's on the policy level. But in operational level, it's done through Indo-Pacific Command that is going to take concrete measures how Australia is going to integrate in the whole operational plan of the U.S., right?
Right. Now, moving to the Cook Islands, the Pacific nation says it will release full details of its comprehensive strategic partnership signed with China. Prime Minister Mark Brown told the media that China will provide his country with $4 billion one-time grant. The Cook Islands maintains a free association relationship with New Zealand, and all its people are New Zealand citizens. Wellington is obliged to defend. The Pacific nation also provides budget support.
该行动计划 将为两国在经济、环境、文化、社会等领域合作提供路线图，有利于双方共同推动各领域友好交流和务实合作取得更多成果，更好地造福两国人民。中库之间的合作不针对第三方，也不应该受到第三方的干扰，这是中方的一贯立场。
Wen-ti, so there have been protests of reports say 400 people on the capital in Cook Island, not happy at the way the leader has negotiated this deal with China, although this protest was opposition-led. Now, New Zealand says it has concerns with what Brown did because they hadn't seen the agreements, even though they asked to review them in advance. Why did Cook Islands, do you think, not show New Zealand? Should it have shown New Zealand? Let them review these agreements.
Wow, that's obviously a politically challenging question to answer, but I think obviously if you are running Cook Island as a government, head of government there, I think you'll be managing pressure both domestic and international, so maybe sometime they will feel like it's easier to manage this new agreement with China if they present it only after the fact, presented after fait accompli. That way you minimize this exposure, discussion, controversy, and pushback beforehand. And that way you can ram it through.
What sort of controversy do you think there would be?
That remains to be seen. We need to go through the full text of the agreement for sure before we can come to a conclusion. But I imagine you involve some kind of quid pro quo, maybe some kind of economic and other system from China towards Cook Islands to start out with. Maybe exchange, they'll be having some kind of quote-unquote win-win cooperation between Cook Island and China in the areas of, let's say, low political sensitivity cooperation, such as the kind of police assistance and training agreement that you see China had with Solomon Island and other Pacific countries for sure. And then I think the hope then is for China, if that's what's actually in it, then the hope for China then will be to hope that it's going to induce over time a certain mission creep. That is, it may gradually spill over from lower sensitivity kind of security cooperation into medium and perhaps higher level sensitivity cooperation in defense security theaters. That over time may give China a greater stake, presence, as well as ability to perhaps deny and slow down Australia, New Zealand, and other broadly speaking Western countries' role in the Cook Islands neighborhood's regional order.
Chenlung, so do you believe that if it was low sensitivity, then why not show the agreements? If this was an arrangement that was expected of them in order to not make such a commotion, such a controversy about this, or was this about asserting their own sovereignty?
The Cook Island had the obligation, had to tell the New Zealand government what they have signed with China. If it's involved with the military or defense purpose, then they have to reveal it. And it's just like China's tried to take over Cook Islands and take advantages of its strategic locations.
Tell me a little bit more about the strategic location.
For Cook Island, that means that China would have a foothold in the South Pacific. I think those are the strategic considerations that the big power is having.
And what sort of influence do you think New Zealand could have over Cook Islands, Wen-ti? You talked about sort of low sensitivity agreements at first, but there is possibly deep sea mining and surveillance.
I mean, in our technology era, so many things can have dual-use implications for sure. Things that would seem initially innocuous and civilian could potentially down the road develop potentially military or military-adjacent purposes and usages as well. It's in that sense that, yes, you may start policing, you may start with maybe, let's say, telecommunication sector cooperation. Telecommunication at some time will give you capacity for electronic surveillance, for example, and that you may help them develop some kind of, let's say, naval navigation capacity that over time can give Chinese vessels ability to get familiarized itself with the local terrain, including underwater terrain, that may then give the ability to work underwater, deep water, deep undersea mining and other purposes for sure. So it's very hard to say. We don't want to, of course, maximize threat perception with every single move out of China, but suffice to say that a measure of transparency in the process of this development, such as Cook Island, for example, trying to communicate better with its, communicate more at least, with other regional states would be a reassuring move for sure.
Right, and I think the fear is always that there could be another Solomon Islands there, where there was a secret agreement to have a Chinese military base, the second after Djibouti. We're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for joining us, Chenlung Kuo and Wen-ti Sung. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.